Hi, everyone. I couldn't get out to campus today, so I'm going to attempt to explain Lab 3 here from my home computer without a document camera. So Lab 3 is about a situation in an imaginary place, I have a feeling, but it's a very real situation that does indeed happen out in the real world. And it is about groundwater contamination by different sources. So first, let me show you the documents that you're going to find in the document folder for this lab. And let me share screen here. So there's two parts to this lab. The first part, part A, is simply watching a video and then answering these questions about porosity and permeability from the information given in the video. And you should try to be thorough. Some of these don't have to be answered with full sentences, but many of them could be answered with full sentences. And especially this last one, make sure that you read this and understand what it is asking, because in previous terms, I've had people give me an answer where it's obvious that they only read half the text sitting here. So there's multiple parts to this one question right here, number 7. So this page will be one of the pages that you will be uploading to, I think I have the wrong lab number on here now that I think about it. No, this is lab 3. Topomap, plate tectonics, and groundwater, yeah. So this is one of the pages that you will be uploading into the submission site on Moodle. So you can type in your answers on this if you want, because it's a Word document, you can add to it. You can print it off, write it out in handwritten answers if you want. Just make sure that I'm going to be able to read the handwriting, and then you can scan and upload however you want to do it. Okay, you don't have to put your name on it because you're going to be uploading it to your own individual site on Moodle. All right, so then stop share this one. And part B is going to take you longer to do. All right, so there's 3 documents in the folder for part B. One of them is this one. This is, I'm going to change that to B. This is the informational document. This one has data that you're going to be working with. It explains how to go about annotating a map that I've also included in this folder, etc. Okay, here's the purpose of the exercise, the procedures that you're going to be doing as you move through the data, etc. Here is information about the actual rocks that are in the undersurface in the area under consideration. You're going to be working with this table here. This is the table of contaminant levels in wells, springs, and river localities in the area under consideration. And then the wells themselves, it gives the elevation of the water table. So remember, the water table is the top of an aquifer. I cannot emphasize enough how you need to go through the lecture notes on groundwater, especially the last part where I talk about groundwater contamination, the movement of groundwater, and how to map the water table. That's really important for you to get into your head before you attempt this lab. Okay, it'll make a lot more sense, hopefully. So we have this data here that we're going to be using. For wells, again, the elevation of the water table at the location of that well, and then the contaminant level in that was brought up in the water from that well, if any. There's 4 spring locations, spring 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's at the surface, so there's no elevation of the water table, because a spring is the intersection of the water table with land surface. But there's one site, one spring that actually had some contaminant in it. And then there's 8 different sites along the river systems in the area under consideration, and shows you if any of those sites have contaminant as well. So that's another surface expression of the water table. And generally, if someplace upstream gets contaminated, then that contaminated is going to flow downstream, and it may very well get diluted as it's mixing in with a larger amount of water, but might still be enough of it that it can be detected by testing. Now, this next section is the explanation of the numbered squares on figure 1. So let me show you figure 1. Okay, so I'm going to stop share this. This is figure 1. Now, the reason I put it in a different file is because this is in landscape format, right? With the wider distance across and the shorter distance up and down, in order to be able to get this block figure. So this is the area under consideration. Now notice I've got a little bit of information. This region seen here in aerial view and cross section contains a series of ridges to the east and a broad gentle valley to the west. So on this block diagram, notice at the east, there's an arrow up here in the upper right. So the block diagram is towards the upper right on this page. Okay. So east is to the upper right, north would be to the upper left, west is to the lower left, etc. So there are small towns and businesses scattered across these ridges and valleys. There's also several farms, a dairy, a number of industrial sites, each of which is labeled with a unique name, i.e. the metalworks. And the metalworks is here. Okay. Now, the letters that you see here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, those are the localities of wells, water wells. And those are the wells that are listed on that table of elevation of the water table and contaminant detected, if any. Okay. And then we have our river. You can see the streams coming out of the hills over here to the east, and then they all kind of coalesce together. And you can see the numbers here. There's an R1. Let's see, where's R1's clear up over here. R2, R3, R4, and 5 are on the south side of the river. And then there's a couple, and R6 is over here. And then as all those streams coalesce together, they combine into one, and our locations R7, R8. Those are the 8 places where water from the river was taken to assess whether there were contaminants in it. Okay. And then our springs, we've got 4 of them. S1's over here by Springtown. S2 is here relatively close to the main river. S3 over here on the south side of the river. And S4 clear up there in the hills to the east. So those are the 4 spring sites where water was extracted for to see if there was any contaminants in it. All right. So these letters 1 through 8 here on this diagram, they have descriptions for what's going on at each of those sites on that document that I was just on, the information and procedures document. Okay. So make sure that you take a look at this thing in 3D here, and you can see the structure of the layered rocks beneath. And those layered rocks, that's what's shown in that block of rocks on the information and procedures document above the table that showed all the wells and the springs and the river data. Okay, so it will help you if you take the time to look at the descriptions of what's going on at each of these sites so that you kind of have an idea about what's going on over here in the west compared to what's going on over here in the east, etc. Okay? Now, hopefully you can tell by looking at this that the topography, the surface topography, is higher in the east than it is in the west. Okay? So if you think about that, obviously the river is flowing from the east to the west, and the data that you have for you to use about the well data, that's going to show you the direction the groundwater flows. Because groundwater flows just like surface water does. It flows from areas of higher elevation to areas of lower elevation. So I'm not going to go through each one of these 1 through 8, but like I said, you should take a look at this diagram, get it kind of in your head, what it looks like, read the descriptions of all 8 of those sites before you proceed on working on this lab. Okay, that's all. Might not seem so when you read it, but it could be very valuable information for you to be answering correctly on the questions that you're asked later. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this and go back to that informational document. Okay, so here again is the stratigraphic section of all those rocks that you saw on the side of that block diagram that I just showed you. Here's that table again, all of the wells A through P, the 4 springs, the 8 localities of where they tested along the river system. And then here is the explanations for those 1 through 8 that are, pointing to certain areas on that block diagram that I showed you just a little bit ago. Okay. Now, use the map found in a separate 1-page file. So if you were to be above the landscape of that block diagram that I just showed you, looking straight down, that's what this map is. Okay. So I'm going to show it to you briefly here. Okay. So this is a 1-page, a good portion. Had to sneeze. A good portion of your grade for this lab is your completing this map, annotating this map in the way I have asked you to do so, and having it save so that when you upload it into Moodle, it does not lose all those annotations. So I'm giving you the map in Word format. You can use Draw. If you're in Word, there's a tool up here that says Draw. And maybe your computer has a software program that you can add lines and dots and so on, numbers to a page like this. Whatever you need to do. You could, if you had a printer, actually print this page out, and it is in color, but you could print it in black and white, and as long as you had brightly colored pencils, because I ask you to do things in different colors, you'd have to have some kind of a way to add by hand what I've asked you to add, and then have it visible, and then of course you'd have to take a picture of it or scan it, and then you could upload that. But if you can work on this document right here, add everything that you're supposed to add to it, and then save it into a PDF. Save it maybe as a Word document first and then PDF, or, go back in and take a look at the document and make sure that you did not lose the work that you did. Because sometimes I've done that. I've saved a Word document as a PDF, and I go back in and look at the PDF, and the stuff has moved all around. The pictures or whatever I've got in that Word document have moved all around. So make sure that the document that you are uploading to Moodle of this page has all of the alterations that you've added, this annotations I'm asking you to make onto this map. Make sure they're all there. Because if I get a map, if you upload this page and this is what it looks like, as far as I know, you have not done any of the work on this lab that I have asked you to do. And knowing me, I'm really bad about procrastinating grading. So it might be a couple of weeks before I get around to grading this lab. And, just gives you that much less time to come back and give me what I need. So I can't be more serious about this. The annotations that you make to this map, make sure that your document that you are uploading to Moodle has those changes on it permanently, so that when it gets uploaded to Moodle, it still has those changes, okay? I can't be serious enough about that. So you can see how this looks different, right? It's flat, whereas when we were seeing this in the cross section, you had all this topography. So now it's just straight flat, but it's still got the same information on it, in that it's got wells A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, etc. It has the springs. Here's spring 1, spring 2 right next to the river, spring 4 up there in the highlands, and then spring 3 over here on the south side, right? East is straight up on this map. Slide Town, here's a coal power plant, Midnight Coal Mine, Cornhead Coal Mine, Springtown, the CQ coal mine right here. And then we kind of get into different, fuel depot. Old gas stations are horrible about having leaking gas tanks. There's been, I don't know, countless numbers of old gas stations that get abandoned, and then they have to go in later and dig up the old tanks and dig a huge pit, because all of the sediment underneath and around those tanks has been contaminated by leaking gas. Here's a dairy farm. Dairy farms can sometimes be bad about the fact that they don't, their manure just sits out there, and you get contaminants going into the flow of water from the manure piles. Purely Plastics. Here's Watts Farm, Driller's Farm, the Burke Chemical Plant, Town of Riverton. Here's the Metalworks over here. So all of these different places, unless this document tells you differently, should be considered possibilities to be the source of contamination. Okay, and this document here has, be sure to read and understand the instructions of 1 through 7 at the end of the information document, which is that longer one I showed you that has the data on the table and so on. But I pretty much just asked you here, make sure that you have these things, A through F, on this map. Those are, these are the things you have to add to this map in order to have done this part of this lab correctly. And again, I emphasize down here, save it in a way that, and know before you upload it to Moodle that it has all of your annotations in place. Okay, so I'm going to go back out of this, back to the informational document. All right, so steps to complete. This is like a longhand format of what I wrote on the side of the page that has just the map on it. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is transfer the data from table 1 to the separate map for the wells A through P, by putting small numbers of the elevation of the water table next to the appropriate well. In Word, you can do this by inserting a text box when selecting, and then selecting no fill and transparent outline under the text box format after typing in the number. This is what I've already done for you in wells A and B. So let's go back to the map. Here's A, I put a number of 110. For B, which I've got this yellow line over, 100. Okay. Now, it just so happens that B is the only water table elevation that was 100. All of them, the rest of them were higher than that. So once you get all these numbers on A through P put on here, then you're going to draw contour lines. And this is like if you were to make a topographic map of the Earth's surface, but instead, your contour lines are for the elevation of the water table. So I have a line here that goes through B, and that's the line for underneath this surface right here that we're looking at. Okay, like maybe the surface is 225 feet above sea level. What this 100 means is at the top of the water table in the aquifer in the area is, here's the land surface at 225 feet. Here's the water table at 100 feet. Now, if we look at that cross section of the big block diagram, the water table is a lot closer to the surface than that. Okay, it's probably 20 to 30 feet at the most. But still, the water table's down here, and then the land surface is up here. So A here has an increment of 110. That's how high, the top of the water table is off of sea level. Now, I've asked you on that procedural document to make lines that have a 10-foot contour interval. So the next line is going to go right through the letter A. And where it ends up over here on the other side depends on what the numbers are for C and D. If they're 105, then the line's going to go above them. If they're 110, then the line's going to go through them. Like, let's say C is 105. We could go back and look and see what it is. Go back up to this data. Yep, I'm remembering correctly. B was 100. That's the one that the yellow line, I've already put one contour line on there for the 100-foot height. A is 110, C is 105, and D is 110. Okay, so if we go back to the map then, and I'll show you what I mean by a text box. This is one way you can do it. I mean, I did it a long time ago and then saved it with those numbers already embedded for here for A and B. For C, so if I go insert, shape, text box, C, 105. And then since I don't want that white box and I just want the numbers themselves, I've got shape format is shape fill, shape outline. So we want shape fill to be no fill, and we want shape outline to be no outline. Okay. And if I want to get that 105 closer over to the C, right? Okay. So there. See how I've added that number? And then D was 110, right? So again, insert shapes, text box. It's amazing how much space around the number it actually needs to be happy. Shape fill, no fill, shape outline, no outline. Okay. So the next contour line that I would put on here is going to be going through the 110 wells, because that's the actual, the same number as the line is representing. And it can't go through the 105, right? 105 is too low. So draw. Oh, I don't like that. Where's my eraser? Eraser. Okay, so go back to draw. Okay, and through the A. And just as with a river, whoops. Try this again. Okay, it's a little bit bumpy. Probably should be smoother than that. But notice how it goes through the well A, and then 105 is between 100 and 110, right? And then it goes through D, which is also a 110 elevation for the water table. And just as with topographic contours, when you cross a stream, water table, I mean, the river is a representation of the water table on the landscape. And so the contour lines that you draw in an area where we have a river going across it, these water table contours, they should bend like this because of the presence of the river. They bend a little bit upriver. Okay. So this is what you're going to do for the rest of these. You're going to put down numbers for E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. And then once you have the numbers, then that's going to determine where you draw your contour lines. So you only have to do 3 more. Well, you have to do 4, right? 110, 120, 130, 140. Because we don't have elevations for the water table up in here except for where the streams and the rivers, those points along at the streams and along the river. That's the only place that we actually have, maybe an idea about where the water table is up in the east side of this block. Okay. So you're going to do that for all the wells. And then once you've got, and you're going to add your contamination data. Okay. So the contamination data, not every spot detected contamination, right? So I'm going to save this real quick. And then go back into the informational document again. So this contamination data, well D and E have some contaminant, and well H has contaminant, I and M. So most of them don't have contaminant. You don't have to mark those, right? You don't have to put zeros next to all the wells that don't have anything in them. Same thing with the spring. I already marked spring 1 with the 50 milligrams per liter. So none of the rest of them, you don't have to mark the rest of them because none of them have it. For the river 2, I think I marked that one, but you're going to have to put small little 5s, the same way I did for the elevation. Okay, we'll have to put small little 5s there for that. And if you draw the contaminant with that draw tool, then you could, it'll be bigger letters probably, or numbers, but you could make it a bright color so they would really stand out. Okay, so as an example of that, I think, like, let's say let me go back there and get that number in my head better. Okay, so like well D had 20 milligrams per liter detected. So here's well D down here in the west. And so let's say, you could light blue, maybe this really bright green. And you could just try to draw on the, okay, and you could try it a few times trying to get the numbers smaller, but all right. So you do that for all the places that are contaminated, and that's going to take care of A. We already did B, the contour lines. Large arrows indicating the direction of groundwater flow. Well, groundwater has a tendency to flow perpendicular to any kind of contouring that you've done on the water table. So these lines aren't perfectly flat, right? They're not perfectly just straight across. And so you're going to want to probably have one relatively larger arrow on each side of the river. And they're going to be some, kind of parallel to each other, but they're also kind of pointing towards the stream a little bit, okay? Because of the way these lines have got a little bit of a hill to them. They're not perfectly flat, they're like this. So groundwater going this way. Again, water flows from high to low, right? That'll be easy. Shading areas where the groundwater is contaminated. So like, let's say over here at spring 1, it had 50 milligrams per liter in it. And so here, like, let's say maybe we're going to use bright pink, okay? And so, maybe something like that, just to show that this area's got contamination. All right. So if you do that, you just kind of shade really quickly around the spot where you've got contaminant on the ones that are contaminated. Then you have the job of figuring out if the contaminant's there, where's it coming from? Okay. So again, on this map, I've asked you to circle around 2 wells that are free of and will continue to be free of contamination. Because once you have your contamination documented, then wells upstream that do not have contaminant in them would be good examples, or shall we say, or good ones to pick to do this with. So granted, you can use your color, a different color, right? Maybe blue. The ones that are good to go are blue. So just an example. I'm not saying that O is, but you could just do something like that. It'll let me do it. Okay. So just a circle around the 2 wells that you think will be free, or that are free of contaminant now because you've got a 0 on that table of data. Plus, it's it's not in the down slope of any contaminant. Okay. So then R is for placement of treatment or remediation wells. So that's probably one of the last things that you're going to do, because what you have to do is, just because you got all your wells down here that are telling you whether they're contaminated or not, but you have to think back to yourself, where is the contamination source? And if these wells are downstream from a possible contamination source, and there's nothing else that would be the contamination source between the well and that, then that contamination is probably, you have to track it all the way back to the contaminating entity. Okay, so let's read down here on the information folder, or file, excuse me, a little bit more, because it's going to tell you some more important things down here. Okay. So you're transferring the data from table 1 to the separate map. So that's both elevation of the water table in the wells and also any contaminant numbers that popping up for the wells, the springs, and the river. Okay. You're going to make your contour lines. You're going to draw your 2 large arrows showing the direction of the groundwater flow, 1 on each side of the river. You're going to document the occurrences of the contaminants, right? I mean, you could do the contour lines first and the contaminants later. You can put all those numbers on at once, however you want to do it. Both have to be done. Draw circles around at least 2 wells that you predict will remain free of contamination. Write the letter R to mark the location of new wells you propose to drill to intercept and remove the contaminated water from the aquifer. Okay. Notes, this is really important here. Notes, One, a recent geologic study has shown that Slide Town and Springtown are not sources of contamination. That's really important. And I've had students tell me in the past that if we go back to that map, they see that spring, this spring right here is contaminated, and they're blaming it on Springtown. So the details tell you right there that that's not true. You can't, they're saying that a geologic study has said that Slide Town, which is up in the hills further to the east, and Springtown are not the sources. And secondly, the contamination can flow through permeable units in the subsurface, but it is less likely to travel through less permeable units, even though the water table is shown as cutting across the units, which it does. So limestone and sandstone, a lot of times, unless the sandstone is really heavily cemented, they're relatively porous, and so you can get transmission of water and water with contaminant in it. But like on that, the figure one, the northwest corner of that block diagram was actually a block of granite in the subsurface, and granite it's crystalline, so it's relatively impermeable. So I think that that is something to consider, but it doesn't necessarily, of those two things in that notes, the fact that Slidetown and Springtown are not sources for contaminant is the more important of those two things for you to keep in mind, okay? So once you've tracked your contaminant source, from where the wells are contaminated back to your possible contaminant source, on that contaminant source, put a large X. It says that here, shade in the areas of contamination of the water table, then use the directions of groundwater flow and stream flow to track back upstream to the source of the contamination. Mark that spot, the source of the contamination, and notice I've said mark that spot, those spots with a large X or large X's. So keep your mind open to the fact that there could be more than one source of contamination in this map, this area under consideration, okay? Then the last thing you have to do under a separate piece of paper altogether, separate piece of paper, written, handwritten, or Word document with you typing in your answer, is number 8 here, which is the last thing on this information procedures document, where you have to summarize your conclusions about the sources of the contamination, explaining the logic you used to identify the facilities that contaminated the water. Summarize how you propose to stop further flow of contaminated water, specifically by drilling wells to intercept and treat the water. Okay, you bring the water up and you treat it, and then you put it back down in the subsurface, is in theory how it should go. Depending on the contaminant, sometimes you can actually introduce chemicals down into the subsurface, into the water, to break the contaminant up or whatever it might be. But more often than not, the water is pulled out, sent through some process, and then allowed to be injected back into the water table lower down in the flow. And then third, justify your location of the treatment of contaminant wells. So where you've put your R's on that map, you're going to say, okay, I think this is a logical spot to put these wells that we're going to pull water out and treat it and put it back in. Okay. I figure that handwritten, it should be at least a half a page. Typed, depending on the font size you use 12 font Arial or something like that. And you actually make it paragraphs with spacing in between, then it could be up to a half page. So be thorough, right? You have to address all three of these things. If by chance you have more than one contamination site, then you have to say these things for every contamination site that you encounter, that you realize that you have, having mapped the map area with the data from the wells and springs and rivers. Okay, so there's going to be 3 things that you're going to upload for this lab. You're going to upload this separate document where you're going to answer number 8 here. Okay, you're going to upload this document with all of your added annotations in place. Make sure that you have saved them and it is locked into this document before you upload it to Moodle. Because if I mean, I've gotten this page, and to tell you the truth, it's always been part of a multi-page document. So maybe that's part of the problem, is that this document wasn't separate. This map wasn't separate. But I've gotten this page with the numbers and the lines and everything over in this area, and it's not like they're just transferred over 2 inches. They're all jumbled up. So again, I emphasize, make sure that the annotations you've made, all of the markings that you've made on this map, are in place and permanent on that figure before you upload this 1-page document back to Moodle. So that's page number 2. And then the third one that you're going to be uploading into the site is part A, the question and answer sheet for part A. All right. So if you have any questions about any particular part of this, remember my phone number is on the syllabus. I am indeed going to take a day and a half or so, well, a couple of days for myself in the end of this week, starting right after my office hour on Thursday. I'm going to be going out of town for a while, and I'll be returning midday or so on Saturday. You can certainly text me and leave me a message, and I'll have my computer with me. And I will have an opportunity to check my phone and open my computer at certain times. I'm just not going to be at my house with my computer, 24/7, right, for a few days at the end of this week. But anyway, you have till next Tuesday to work on this lab and get it uploaded. And so that should give you enough time to get a hold of me and get my help if you want it. I'm more than willing to answer questions or, guide you through some of the things that you're not quite sure if you understand. Okay? This is the kind of work that people do out in the real world. If you are an environmental scientist that works for, let's say, this, EWEB or the city water department, or the EPA or the Forest Service, or right, this is the type of work that you may very well be asked to do. So that's one of the reasons that I like this lab, even though it's kind of complicated, how you put your data on that map and then get it back up to me. But this is the kind of thing that you might be asked to do if you had that kind of a job. So I like the fact that it's kind of real world. All right. Well, I'm going to stop this recording and then I'll get it uploaded to Moodle as quickly as I can. And so have a good week.